Welcome, guys, gals, and any other combination that you wish to be. This is the Brit here from Yankee and the Brit, and today what we're going to discuss is football, American football. Of course, of the two of us, I'm sure you weren't expecting me to be the one to be posting anything about football, but don't let the accent put you off. So, I'm going to attempt to answer the biggest question in football. Who is the true GOAT? Obviously, Tom Brady is seemingly the front runner, but let's try and see if we can add credence to that, or perhaps if we can deny that. So, after Tom Brady left New England, shocking a lot of people, many people felt we would learn the answer to the question, is it Brady or is it Belichick that made the Patriots so successful? With New England's woes after the season, both a quarterback and an array of players sitting out due to COVID, as well as Brady's obvious success with Tampa Bay, many people are ready to make the claim that New England's unprecedented success can officially be accredited to Tom Brady, and his title as GOAT is therefore confirmed. However, to be the greatest quarterback of all time, do we simply have to take into account Super Bowl wins? Does it all come down to that? Does that automatically make him the best quarterback? So, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to attempt to break down the factors which go into making a quarterback the GOAT. I'm going to start by looking at which quarterbacks are the best at the position. I'm then going to look and see which have played for the best teams, and therefore had the best tools for success. And then I'm going to look at the divisions, see who's played the hardest games. To make this comparison, I'll be selecting modern day quarterbacks who have played in the last 20 years. Some who are often counter arguments to Brady's title, and some others who are often discounted due to lack of results, and attempt to rank them in a series of categories. I'm not looking at the older greats, as it's very hard to make an accurate comparison because of how the game's developed over the years. Obviously now it's quite a pass-heavy league from what it has been in the past. So the quarterbacks I'm going to be looking at, I'm going to be looking at Tom Brady, I'm going to be looking at Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, Tony Romo, Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, Philip Rivers, and Kirk Cousins. So I'm only be considering quarterbacks that have played for at least 100 NFL games. But I've got to make an honourable mention here to Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, and Dak Prescott, who are currently posting stats which, if they were to keep up, will put them firmly in the conversation. So I'm going to start by looking at the stats. So, most obvious place to start, quarterback rating. Quarterback ratings are a combined statistic. They consider passing attempts, completion yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. This combined metric seems the logical place to begin. We can see that Aaron Rodgers takes a clear number one spot, Russell Wilson comfortably in number two, and after that, the gaps between the ratings seem to reduce, putting Drew Brees to Peyton Manning 5 quarterback spread out by just 2.2 points. Because of the way the rating system is calculated, the best way to sum it up tells us most clearly ranks them in their pure passer ability, so not taking into account any of their other facets or anything else to do with their team. Now I'm going to look at yards per game. See, a total yards stat, although very impressive for longevity, and obviously we put Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning way up there. It doesn't help us when we're comparing quarterbacks who have played for varying lengths of time. There are different phases of their career, so I'm going to rank them based on how many yards they throw per game. So Drew Brees has clearly made his career in a heavy passing offense, and it's been relied upon to push the ball down the field. It's no surprise that he has the most career passing yards in the regular season by a fairly large margin. 5 seasons with over 5,000 passing yards. Matt Ryan and Peyton Manning grouped in sort of second and third spot, and then pretty close from fourth down to eighth, only separated by 4.1 yards per game. A big factor in this also has to be scheme, though, and how teams use the run game, which we will mention for the obvious quarterback later in this segment. So, passing touchdown percentage. The number of pass touchdowns per completion shows another impressive rate for Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, which is probably why their quarterback rating is so high. Separating them from the pack in this stat, as well as in quarterback rating, it does seem to be that those two probably the most likely to finish a drive with a touchdown. Not a great surprise, as Aaron Rodgers is the fastest player to over 400 touchdowns. He did it in just 193 games, and after last season, no real sign of slowing down. Pass completion percentage, so the closest stat to pure accuracy of a quarterback, although wide receiver talent and yards per attempt are factors in completion, of course. So Drew Brees, very good numbers here, just considering is also the highest yards per game by a decent margin too, makes this stat even more impressive. So he's throwing for further yardage and with a higher completion percentage than all of the other quarterbacks. Tom Brady's last here, but a fairly small gap from 3rd to 10th. Only really Drew and Kirk will separate themselves in this stat. Yards per attempt, so important factor when considering some of the other stats we've looked at. Almost half a yard difference. That may not seem huge, but over a career would become more substantial when combining some of the other factors. So shorter passes are sometimes the better option because you can keep the chain moving. You're more likely to have a higher completion percentage, can help chew the clock. However, shorter pass attempts and a lower completion percentage, Tom Brady, would mean a quarterback tends to get less first downs. So, touchdown to interception ratio. Obviously shows a combination of ability to finish a drive with a touchdown and also ball security. However, a player that makes more attempts and has a higher yards per attempt would probably have a higher chance of being picked off. So if they're trying to push the ball down the field more, they're more likely to get picked. So it isn't necessarily just a measure of accuracy, but it does show ball security and ability to finish drives with a touchdown. At this stage, it seems that based purely on our stats, top 5 would probably be a combination of Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, Russell Wilson, and surprisingly, Kirk Cousins, who was in top 5 in all but touchdown percentage, which, considering he's not a particularly well-received quarterback, is quite impressive. So now I'm going to start looking at the teams. So winning games comes down to more than which team has the best quarterback. Often things get simplified when volume wins can be attributed to quarterbacks, but that's a huge oversimplification. When we start to try and deal with the impossible to answer hypotheticals like, would Tom Brady have had this level of success in another team, or would another quarterback been in Tom Brady's team, would he have had his level of success at the Patriots? We struggle to put any quantifiable evidence together. So I'll try and break down whose supporting roster has given them the best chance of success in an attempt to see if any individuals have shown they've been able to outperform any limitations around them. So I'm going to start with defense. We've all heard the famous saying, defense wins championships. So let's take a look at the team's defensive ranking, because this is a factor completely unrelated to quarterbacks play, but if a team has a poor defense, we have seen it's almost impossible to overcome this throughout an entire season, and especially going into the playoffs when you're going to face the more high-powered offenses, no matter how good your offense is. Since 2001, the average defensive rank of a Super Bowl winning team has been 7.37. in the league. Only 5 teams in that time have had a defense ranked outside the top 8. The average offensive rank is 8.53. Not a lot further away, but 10 of those teams have had an offense ranked outside the top 8. So it seems quite clear to see that it's more likely you're going to win a Super Bowl because your defense is one of the top in the league rather than your offense is. So let's look at these players' average defensive rank throughout. So Russell Wilson on the Hawks here, showing an amazing average rank. He had the number 1 ranked D for the first 4 years of his career. And let's remember that they did win a Super Bowl and made it to another, where they had the ball in hand on the 1-yard line and made what was perhaps one of the worst calls in Super Bowl history. Obviously arguable, but they had Lynch, who was on the field, averaging over 4.5 yards per carry, or 4 yards per carry. I think it was nearly 4.5. He dominated all year, but they picked a pass play and well read by the Patriots cornerback, losing them a very close game, but a decent strike rate, taking advantage of the defense when it was ranked number 1. Far more impressive, though, is the rank of the Patriots. Over 18 seasons to rank higher than the Super Bowl winning team is amazing, because you always expect the Super Bowl winning team to have the most impressive stats overall over that period, because it's got 32 teams to pick from, so they're most likely to have the best. The draft system and salary cap should prevent this level of consistency, but it makes it clear just how good the coaches have been for the Patriots. Also, there has to be credit here given to Brady. He must have had large offers for his salary on various points throughout his career, but has usually stayed away from the higher paid guys, instead keeping salary space to keep the best players. So credit where it's due. At the bottom end, Drew Brees clearly has not been on a team that has been able to build a defense for him. Passing offense average rank. I will mention at this point passing offensive rank doesn't necessarily make a great comparison overall, as different teams have different play callers and some tend to lean on the run, especially when teams have had strong running backs at certain points during their career. So Peyton's offensive average rank, though, of 3.06 is an amazing level of consistency, and Peyton is obviously a common denominator in that. And that stat alone makes you wonder how he didn't achieve more Super Bowls. Although, in reality, we know that's because he often ran into the Patriots. So, fairly unsurprisingly, Drew's comfortable second base here, based on some of the stats we've already looked at. That seems pretty obvious. And then it sort of dwindles down steadily until you get down to Russell Wilson, but that's an obvious example of somewhere where a team has lent heavily on the run, which I will mention again, as I keep saying. So the top 5 so far: Peyton Manning. First impressions show that throughout his career, Peyton's offense has been outstanding. Only twice in his career, his passing offense has been outside the top 5, and those rankings were still both 6th. His passing offensive ranking has been first overall 4 times. Conversely, his defense's average rank has been 15.25. Only 6 times in his 16 season has he had a top 10 defense. Quarterback rating 7th overall, yards per game 3rd overall, touchdown percentage 3rd overall, pass completion 4th overall, yards per pass attempt 7th, touchdown to interception ratio 6th. His stats put him in the lower end of the top 5, and this, in combination with his poor defense and incredible average pass offense rank, puts him unquestionably in the top 5. Drew Brees, similar story to Manning's career. Only 3 times has his passing offense been outside the top 10. Only 6 times outside the top 5 in 16 of his playing seasons. but even worse defense for his teams, with an average ranking of 17.65. That's in the bottom half of the NFL. Only twice having a defense that ranked within the top 10, and that was 7th and 4th. It's also very important to note, since he moved to the Saints, his average passing offensive rank is 2.92, which is higher than Peyton, as well as passive offensive ranking first overall 6 times in his 16 seasons. But with the amount of 5,000 yard receiving, 5,000 yard passing off years he's had, again, not that great a surprise. Quarterback rating overall 3rd, yards per game 1st, touchdown percentage 6th, pass completion percentage 1st, yards per pass attempt 8th, touchdown to interception ratio 4th. His average passer stats are overall top 3. He's had to compensate for the worst defense of any of the 10 that I'm taking into account, and kept 2nd best passing offense, which would be 1st if you're only taking into account his time at the Saints. So Tom Brady, throughout his career in the Patriots dynasty, they have averaged top 8 offenses and defense over all those 18 playing seasons. Only one season his passing offense has been outside the top 12. The defensive average better than all Super Bowl winning teams since 2001, when he started with the Patriots. In the 18 seasons he has played, that's just an unbelievable defensive consistency and, in fairness, offense. Unlikely that any other team has ever come close to those sorts of averages, and probably ever will again. So they must be considered when looking at his success is the defense as well. So quarterback rating 5th, yards per game 4th, touchdown percentage 5th, pass completion percentage 10th, yards per pass attempt 10th, touchdown to interception ratio 3rd. So accuracy does generally put him outside the top 5. His completion percentage and yards per attempt are both the lowest of the 10 quarterbacks, which was a surprise to me, but he's top 5 in other categories and 3rd passing offense of these teams, so he must really be put into the top 5. Aaron Rodgers, top 10 average offense and an average defensive rank 13.9. Consistent team ranks. His passing offense average rank has only been outside the top 10 twice, and they were 26th and 17th in 10 seasons. Those 2 seasons being far from the other 8. Pushed the average out quite a lot. If we took those 2 seasons out of consideration, the average rank would be 7, putting him 3rd overall. But the dips cannot be discounted, despite being uncharacteristic. So quarterback rating 1st, yards per game 6th, touchdown percentage 1st, pass completion 6th, yards per pass attempt 4th, touchdown to interception ratio 1st. Overall arm talent has been something that's been applauded for his entire career. The stats really do back it up. His touchdown and interception rates for over 100 plus games played are second to none, as well as passing offense that 8 out of the 10 years have averaged 7th. Finally, we're going to look at Russell Wilson. So passing offense is the lowest of the 10. This is one of the main reasons it's important to consider scheme. Pete Carroll has been known for trying to keep a 50-50 pass-run offense ratio, limiting his passing offensive rank. Seahawks have been ranked top 4 in rushing offense in 6 of the 8 seasons as a starter for Russell Wilson, which puts the stats somewhat into perspective. No one has had a better defense than him, ranking 1st for the first 4 years. He has had one of the shortest spans of any players we're comparing, and under these top defenses, teams made it to the Super Bowl twice. So an important thing to note here is that the average defense ranking of Seattle between 2001 and 2019, equivalent to the Patriots, is 12.95. So although they were number 1, the best defense on Wilson's career, beating the Pats and the Super Bowl average, what the Patriots achieved in that regard is just unmatched over such a long period of time. So quarterback rating second, yards per game ninth, touchdown percentage second, pass completion seventh, yards per pass attempt second, touchdown to interception ratio second. So these stats add credence to him being considered one of the best deep ball passers in the game. Completion percentage is only seventh, but when taken into account with yards per attempt, it may affect this factor being a lower rank. Also, his yards per game being second lowest, matching up with the heavy run game that the Seahawks have committed to over his career. So the remaining five, the other five quarterbacks in some regards have arguments for still being considered in the top five. Tom Brady's accuracy stats being a factor, which you could argue, if only ranked by that, puts a few of these quarterbacks ahead of him. But what I'm attempting to do is try and find a way to categorise greatness. And there are elements of the unmeasurable in all sports that can be separating factors. So although he doesn't have the best stats, the passing offense of the Patriots has been the most successful one of the most successful, of all time, due in no small part to Tom Brady himself, so we have to keep him included. So now I've looked at the players and I've looked at the defense. I'm going to have a look at the opponents. So I'll be looking at win-loss ratios of all the other teams within each team's division to see which player has had the weaker division to play in. I'll be taking the stats from 2002 when the NFL reached 32 teams. I'll be not working out specific division competition for the exact playing years, as I'm just looking for a general win-loss ratio for these years to see which had the easier division over this period. So Brady at the Patriots, 2002 to 2019. Patriots win-loss ratio, he had a plus 154 ratio. The rest of the division had a minus 100. So seemingly stood out very high, the Patriots, above the rest of the division, indicating, one, that the Patriots have been very good, and two, that the rest of the division have not. So Rodgers at the Packers. Packers win-loss ratio is plus 73, and the rest of the division is minus 79. So obviously the rest of the division is slightly better, but the Packers have not dominated as much as the Patriots did in this period. Peyton at the Colts. I haven't taken into account Denver. I've just looked at the Colts for him because that's where he spent most of his career. The Colts win-loss ratio is plus 74, minus 94. Again, not the best division, and not an amazing win ratio when you compare it with the Patriots, although it's obviously amazing otherwise. Wilson at the Seahawks. Seahawks win-loss ratio plus 47. Rest of the division minus 106. So over that long period, the rest of the division haven't been particularly strong overall. Of course, at the moment, they're looking like one of the strongest divisions in all of football, but it's towards the end of our period here. And then Brees at the Saints. Saints win-loss ratio plus 44. Rest of the division minus 20. So NFC South, where Brees has spent most of his career, has clearly been the strongest all-round division of these years. The NFC North is also shown to be a fairly difficult division, as their negative for the rest of the division is second. So for other players, the majority of their careers have been played in less competitive leagues, but the Patriots win-loss ratio definitely stands out here as a very impressive ratio. So the final thing I'm going to look at now is I'm going to look at the weapons, because this is an important factor. And try and break down which of these players has been given the tools to help boost their stats. So I'm going to start with Tom Brady, and then an obvious starting point is Gronk, one of the greatest tight ends ever to play the game. Probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. He'll walk straight in. Nearly 8,000 yards with New England, 79 touchdowns, and 65.6% catch percentage, which is very, very good in wide receiver terms, let alone tight end. And we've also seen him make a lot of key plays at a lot of big moments. It's probably safe to say that without Gronk, there'd be a few less rings on Tom Brady's hand. But there you go. It's not to diminish what Tom Brady's achieved. Wes Welker, so career catch percentage 70.8%, extremely high, and that was 72.6% when he was with the Patriots, being thrown to by Tom Brady, which is one of the highest catch percentages of someone who's played that level of games of any player ever. 7,459 yards, 37 touchdowns. Then Randy Moss, Hall of Fame receiver, in argument for the greatest ever wide receiver. Played 3 years and 4 games with Brady for the Patriots. He caught 50 touchdowns in that time period, 23 in his first year with them. Not the greatest catch percentage, 58.3%, and 3,904 yards, but that was over 3 years and 4 games, so pretty good. Over 1,000 yards per season in his 3 full seasons with them. Then Julian Edelman, 65.9% career receiving percentage, 36 touchdowns, 6,800 yards, all for the Patriots. Although all stats I've taken from the regular season, the most notable moment between the two of them came in the comeback win to the Falcons in the Super Bowl. Brady throwing a potential interception, got tipped by the quarterback, and the Falcons cornerback throwing the ball up, and Edelman making possibly the most unlikely catches in all of NFL history, probably the most unlikely catch in the Super Bowls for sure, and actually brought them back into the game, and they ended up winning it. So, crucial player for the Patriots. Even with Randy Moss in the picture, one of the greatest to play the game, the most notable weapon to speak of is Rob Gronkowski, must be in the conversation for greatest tight end as well. So Brady has been able to throw the ball up and let him make plays at many crucial times in his career. One of the hardest players to stop because of his size and athleticism. It's interesting to imagine what sort of stats he could have had he not been seemingly constantly had minor injuries that seem to have been present throughout his entire career. Next, we're going to look at Aaron Rodgers. So we've got Jordy Nelson. Perhaps won't go down in history as one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game, but a true testament to what a good quarterback wide receiver rapport could do. 9 years with Rodgers at Green Bay, 7,842 yards, 4 seasons over 1,000 yards and 69 touchdowns, 65.8% catch rate. Actually, fairly similar to Gronk's stats, surprisingly. And we've got Devontae Adams. Not the best start to his career. So his career first 2 seasons were very forgettable at best. But after that, he's emerged as widely regarded one of the best route running currently in the game. 6,568 yards in 7 seasons and 62 touchdowns. A catch percentage of 64.8%. And going back now, we've got Greg Jennings. 3 full seasons with Rodgers. Caught over 1,000 yards in each year. Played a huge role in getting them the win in the Super Bowl in 2010. 38 touchdowns in those 3 years. And nearly 5,000 yards in his 5 seasons with Aaron Rodgers. Career catch percentage, 58.9%. Still very good, but not necessarily as good as some of the other wide receivers we're looking at now. So then we've got Randall Cobb. 69.6% catch rate at Green Bay under Rodgers. 5,524 yards and 41 touchdowns. Not necessarily the biggest yardage or the biggest red zone threat, but a great catch percentage and chain mover. And James Jones, 8 seasons with Rodgers, 5,861 yards, 45 touchdowns, and a 59.6% catch rate. Not a great red zone threat and not one of the best catch percentages, but it has been a big part of Aaron Rodgers' career. So some decent talent throughout the years here. Not many that really stand out as being a dominant wide receiver. does seem that throughout his career, he's usually only had one receiver at a time that's been considered a go-to guy, but he's managed to create a strong connection with them, and due to his accuracy, seemingly able to make plays to them time and time again, no matter what the defense does, and has made most of his career spreading it to less known wide receivers. So now let's look at Drew Brees. This is a tricky one to find anyone note here. So we've got Marquise Colston, Drew Brees, clear number one of his career, almost 10,000 yards in 10 seasons, 6 seasons over 1,000 yards, and 2 more over 900. A huge 72 career touchdowns, all by Drew Brees. Catch percentage 64.7%, very consistent career, and Drew's go-to guy throughout. Then you got Jimmy Graham, 5 years for Brees, 59 touchdowns in 5 years, possibly one of the best tight end stretchers in history, achieving just under 12 touchdowns per year average, 4,752 yards, 2 over 1,000 for a tight end, which is always a big landmark. Not been as successful since in his years at Seattle, Green Bay, and Chicago, and obviously he's had some good quarterbacks there, although perhaps scheme played a larger factor in some of the things like at Green Bay, as we know, where he seemed to not be able to catch the ball. So Lance Moore is third most successful wide receiver, which potentially shows some of the limits of the weapons that he's had over the years. Played 8 seasons, 4,281, so that's an average of just over 500 yards per season, and 38 touchdowns, but very good catch percentage, 66.8%. Recent memory now, we've got massive talent, Michael Thomas, 77.6% catch rate and over 1,000 yards in all of his first 4 seasons, record-breaking 149 receptions with 1,725 yards and over 100 yards per game in 2019. Sadly, it seems Drew Brees' career has actually come to an end before he's been really able to take advantage of what's potentially a once-in-a-generation level of set of hands because they're so consistent. So, a somewhat limited group of weapons there over his career. He's thrown over 500 touchdown passes, but outside Colston and Jimmy Graham, he hasn't been able to find much success anywhere else since. Very few wide receivers he's had have been particularly impressive with their numbers. It does seem that Brees' accuracy and his talent at reading the fields meant that he's been able to make something of nothing for a large portion of his career. Peyton Manning. Marvin Harrison, one of the most successful wide receivers to play the game, with a career 14,580 receiving yards and a whopping 128 touchdowns. 10 plus touchdowns in 8 seasons in a row, and over 100 yards per game average twice in his career. Both achieved with Manning at quarterback, and a 61.9% catch percentage. Now Reggie Wayne, 8,903 yards from Manning, and 67 touchdowns, 7 seasons in a row with over 1,000 yards, handed the reins from Harrison to become Manning's number one for years after. Dallas Clark, good career for a tight end, 9 seasons with the Colts, 4,887 yards, 46 touchdowns and a catch percentage of 65.8%. And then his guy for the Broncos, he had Demaryius Thomas. After his 2 rookie seasons, had 4 consecutive seasons with over 1,300 yards, 3 of those seasons catching 10 plus touchdowns, and a career catch rate 60.7%. It's unclear as to whether Peyton has been very lucky with the players that he's had, drafted and brought him in over the years, but seemingly is able to make receivers routinely have 1,000 plus receiving yards. One thing to note is that Thomas's production has never been the same since Peyton left. I know he hasn't had the best quarterbacks, but it does add credence to his ability to get the most out of wide receivers and get high production, even if perhaps they wouldn't have had them with many other quarterbacks. Russell Wilson. So Doug Baldwin, 8 seasons for the Seahawk, managed 2 seasons over 1,000 yards, 6,563 total yardage, and 49 touchdowns. Not the most prolific stats, but 68.3% catch rate, solid number one receiver for Russell. We've got Tyler Lockett, 6 seasons, getting 4,892 yards so far, and 37 touchdowns. A fantastic 72.6% catch rate, highest of any I've looked at so far. Possibly one of the most underrated talents currently in the NFL. Personally, I like him more than DK Metcalf. He's really found his feet after the departure of Doug Baldwin, becoming Russell's go-to guy, pulling off some very impressive catches, but perhaps quite literally overshadowed by DK Metcalf. But like Aaron Rodgers and Tay Adams, these two seem to have found a way to connect. DK Metcalf, probably the most physically imposing wide receivers in the game, if not ever in the game. Very new, but 2,203 yards in 2 seasons and a decent 61.6% catch rate. Only a few cornerbacks in the game have seemed to have any sort of answer for this man's speed and physicality. Russell Wilson so far in his young career has not had many weapons of any real note, perhaps in part due to their offensive scheme, which is one of the most run-heavy and utilises Russell's ability to make plays with his feet, although it does seem like he does finally have 2 guys which can make big plays. So, the conclusion. It's hard to define what greatness is, and everyone's going to have their opinions. In an ideal world, we'd be able to put all these players on the same teams against the same opponents and see which has the most success. Sadly, that's not possible. And in a game where teams have a 53-man roster and quarterbacks spend less than half the time on the field, all with different supporting casts, facing different opponents, all we can do is try and put together all the factors together and try and draw some conclusion to that. And from that, the quarterback, which I think is quite clearly shows the most signs of being the best, is Drew Brees. Drew Brees has had by far the worst defense of any of these players, an average rank at the bottom half of the league. He's had very few receivers of any real note and still managed to put up some of the most impressive numbers of any player ever to play the game. He throws for more yards per game than any other and has the highest completion percentage. He also has the 3rd highest quarterback rating, beaten only by Rodgers and Wilson from that list, which is due mostly to how few interceptions they throw. It's impossible to know what would have happened if he'd been on a better team throughout his career. But looking at his stats, there's little to say that he would not have potentially been as, or potentially even more successful than Tom Brady. I think it's safe to say that Tom Brady is not the best quarterback to ever play the game. At a push, his stats put him top 5. Realistically, he's somewhere in the tail end of the top 10 in terms of skill at the position. But is that what we define greatness as? He's not as accurate as most of these quarterbacks. He takes shorter throws and completes them less often. He's not the most mobile. He's not the most dynamic. He has had the tools that none of the others have had. Their defenses and some of the offensive weapons they've had over the years are ones that any of these quarterbacks can only wish for, along with being in possibly one of the most easy divisions as well. So, we can look at the stats and the teams and say that Brady has had the best chance of any of these quarterbacks to be successful. But the crucial part is, would any of these others had his success if they had had his team? And what it comes down to is we can't answer that. We can't answer that question. But what we do know is that with that team, Brady has become the most successful player in all of history. He took the team to 9 Super Bowls, the Patriots is now, and won 6 of them, He's won more postseason games than any other quarterback has even played in. So the conclusion here is actually pretty simple. Where other quarterbacks we can only guess at success, he has proved time and time again, with the right set of tools, he can do it. Even if he's not the best to ever stand in the pocket in an NFL team, where others might or might not have, he has. And therefore, he is the greatest player to ever do it. So, I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any comments, any opinions, feel free to put them in the comments. Like, share, and make sure you subscribe. So, this is the Brit from Yankee and the Brit. I'm sure we'll have loads more football talk and probably revisit this subject time and time again, especially as some of these guys' careers are still going. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Ooh.